The wind didn't just howl, it scraped. It was a physical presence, a blade of granular ice that sliced across the endless, agonizing white of the Mammoth steppe. It stole the breath from Ilara's lungs before she could fully exhale, forcing its way through the layers of hide and fur she'd stitched together with sinew and hope. This was Beringia. They called it the land bridge, but the word bridge suggested a crossing, a finite structure. This was not a bridge. It was a continent of ice, a frozen purgatory that had already swallowed 2 winters of their lives. Ilara adjusted the sealskin straps, feeling the fragile warmth of her daughter Sona shifting against her back. Sona, born on the ice, knew nothing else. She had never seen a tree, only the skeletal remains of driftwood protruding from the permafrost like the ribs of forgotten giants. Behind them, the lands of their ancestors were dead, scoured clean of the great herds, haunted by competing, starving clans. Ahead of them lay only a rumor, a story whispered by a dying shaman of a new world, a place untouched by the endless cold, where the ice finally surrendered to forests and the sun's warmth was not a distant memory but a daily promise. That rumor was all Kyle, her partner, needed. He walked ahead, a silhouette of grim determination, his spear a dark vertical line against the horizontal tyranny of the horizon. They were not traveling. They were fleeing a tomb, gambling their last embers of life on the insane hope that the world had not, in fact, already ended. Kyle stopped. The sound of his snowpack boots crunching to a halt was jarring in the oppressive stillness. Ilara drew level with him, her eyes scanning the ice. What? Her voice was a dry rasp, stolen by the wind. Kyle didn't look at her. He pointed with his chin toward a ridge, kilometers distant, where the ice seemed to shimmer with a sickly green-purple light. The skyfire, he breathed. It's early. The aurora. Beautiful, yes, but to them it was a portent. The elders taught that the skyfire was the breath of the ancestors, and it meant the spirits were restless. It meant the weather was turning. Tavik, Kale's uncle and the only elder left in their small band of 3 adults, stumbled forward. He was the keeper of their map, a series of notched bones that held the memory of the migration path. He squinted at the sky, his face a roadmap of frostbite scars. They are angry, Tavik coughed, a dry, brittle sound that seemed to crack the air. We were warned not to leave the coast. The deep ice, it does not forgive. Kyle turned on him, his patience worn thin as scraped hide. The coast was barren. We waited. Nothing came. We follow the path, or we die where we stand. Ilara watched the 2 men, the tension between them as sharp as the cold. Tavek represented the past, the traditions that had failed them. Kyle represented the desperate future, a gamble on a myth. Ilara, with Sona sleeping on her back, was the present. She was the one who had to keep the fragile, living future warm. She placed a mittened hand on Kyle's arm. We need shelter, now. Before that, fire is upon us. The sky did not fall slowly. It collapsed. The green-purple fire of the aurora, which had shimmered like a spirit banner, was torn apart by a physical wall of black. The wind that followed was not the scraping gale of the steppe. This was a new sound, a hollow, deafening roar that seemed to rise from the ice itself. It was the sound of the world ending. "Shelter!" Kyle roared, but the sound was stolen from his mouth. He grabbed Tavik by the thick ruff of his caribou hide parka and physically dragged him forward. Tavik, blinded by the sudden swirling chaos, stumbled, his precious bone map slipping from his numb fingers. It clattered onto the ice. "The map!" he screamed, dropping to his knees. Ilara saw the movement. In one fluid motion she lunged, snatching the bundle of notched bones just as a gust of wind threatened to scatter them across the plain. "Leave it!" Kyle yelled, grabbing her arm. "We move, or we are buried." She shoved the bones inside her parka, against the warmth of her own skin, and lowered her head. The air was no longer air. It was a suffocating cloud of ice needles, driving straight through their furs, seeking the warmth of their blood. Sona, sensing the panic, began to wail, a thin, terrified sound, muffled against Ilara's back. "I can't see." Tavek cried, clutching his face. "The spirits! They have blinded me!" The world was gone. There was no sky, no ice, only a churning vertical vortex of white. Visibility was not feet. It was inches. Ilara could only follow Kale by the dark shape of his back, a smudge of grey against the grey. She focused on the impossible task of breathing. Inhale, and the frozen particles seared her lungs. Exhale, and the moisture froze instantly on the fur trim of her hood, sealing it to her face. Kyle was their anchor. He did not falter. He leaned into the storm as if it were a physical opponent, his spear used as a probe, testing the ice ahead. He was searching for something he couldn't see, operating on an instinct forged by a lifetime of this brutal existence. Ilara knew the calculus of their survival. If they stopped moving, the wind would encase them in ice. Their body heat would be stripped away in minutes. They would simply become part of the landscape, a frozen monument to a failed journey. "Here!" Kyle's voice was a guttural bark, barely audible over the din. He had found it. A pressure ridge, a place where two colossal plates of ancient ice had collided, thrusting upwards in a jagged spine of blue-white. It was a fortress wall created by the planet's own slow violence. Kyle ran his hand along its base, searching. A hollow, under the drift. He shoved Tavek toward it. It wasn't a cave, not truly. It was a deep cleft, a fracture in the ice, shielded by a massive frozen wave of snow. It was barely large enough for the three of them and the child, a tomb-like alcove that smelled of ozone and ancient cold. They piled inside, one after another, collapsing into a heap of furs and exhaustion. Kyle, the last one in, used his spear and his feet to kick snow and ice blocks into the opening, narrowing it until only a sliver of the raging storm was visible. The sound changed. The deafening roar subsided into a muffled, terrifying vibration. The ice around them seemed to hum, alive with the power of the tempest. For a long time no one spoke. The only sound was their own ragged breathing and the faint, high-pitched thrum of the wind finding its way through the micro-cracks in their shelter. Ilara's first thought, her only thought, was Sona. She frantically unwrapped the straps, pulling the child from her back into the cradle of her lap. Sona's face was pale, her tiny lips tinged with blue. She was not crying, she was terrifyingly still. "Kyle, the lamp," Ilara said, her voice shaking. "Now." Kyle was already working. From his pack he pulled the essentials, the soapstone lamp carved by his own father, the bladder of precious seal oil, the fire starter, 2 pieces of iron pyrite and a tuft of dried moss. His hands, raw and cracked, fumbled with the stone. "My hands. I can't feel them," he hissed, his voice tight with frustration. Tavek, who had been rocking back and forth, muttering, suddenly lunged forward. "Give it to me." He pushed Kyle's hands away. "Your fingers are dead. Mine still have the memory." Tavek's movements were slow, agonizing, but practiced. He held the moss against the pyrite, striking the stones together. Click, 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 thwack. A single, hesitant spark caught the moss. Tavek blew on it, a fragile, wheezing breath, coaxing the ember. It glowed. He carefully transferred it to the moss wick, soaking in the lamp's oil. A small, smoky, golden flame sputtered to life. The effect was instantaneous. The tiny flame threw their monstrous shadows against the blue, crystalline walls of the ice cave. It was not warmth, not yet. But it was light. It was hope. Ilara stripped off her outer mitten, ignoring the sting of the air, and pressed her bare hand against Sona's chest. She rubbed, creating friction, desperate. "Wake up, little bird," she whispered. "You cannot sleep now. Wake up and cry, cry for me." Sona's eyelid fluttered. She let out a weak, gasping cough. Ilara pulled her daughter close, tucking her deep inside her own parka, sharing her core heat, whispering the hunting songs her mother had taught her, using the rhythm of the words to will life back into the child. Kyle watched, his face a mask of exhaustion. He finally turned to Tavek, who was nursing the lamp flame, shielding it with his body. "You see," Kyle said, his voice raw, "the new path provides. That ridge, it saved us." Tavek looked up, his eyes, sunk deep in their sockets, glittering in the lamplight. He seemed to have aged a decade in the last hour. "Saved us," he rasped, "or trapped us. You are a fool, Kale. You mistake a cage for a shelter." Tavek's hand went to his own chest, pulling out the bone map Ilara had saved. He ran a thumb over the familiar notches. "The spirits are angry. The skyfire was the warning. This storm, this is the punishment. We should have stayed on the coast. We should have followed the old path, the way the ancestors walked. The old path is a graveyard." Kyle snapped, his patience finally breaking. "The herds are gone. The coast is barren. Your ancestors died on that path, Tavek. That is why we are the only ones left." "They died with honor," Tavek retorted, his voice rising to a thin shriek. "They died respecting the balance. You are arrogant. You chase a ghost story, a shaman's fever dream of a new world. You lead us into the white emptiness to die, all for your pride. I lead us toward life." Kyle roared, slamming his fist against the ice wall. A shower of frost fell from the ceiling. "I would rather die walking toward a chance than starve kneeling in a place of memory." Ilara flinched. Sona started to cry, a healthy, angry wail. Ilara felt a surge of relief so profound it made her dizzy. "Quiet, both of you," she commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "You will scare her, and you will waste the air we have." She looked from Kale's burning eyes to Tavek's trembling despair. "Tavek, your map is useless if we do not have the strength to walk it. Kale, your hope is useless if we starve before we find your new world." She reached into her own pack and pulled out their food supply. She laid it on a flat piece of hide between them. The lamp illuminated it. It was 3 strips of dried mammoth meat, blackened and hard as wood. A small bladder of rendered fat. That was all. "This," Ilara said softly, "is the only truth that matters right now. This storm could last a day, or it could last a moon cycle. This food is for 3 days, if we are careful." The silence that followed was heavier than the ice above them. Kyle's anger deflated, replaced by the grim shadow of responsibility. Tavek looked at the food, then at Sona, and his hard expression softened into one of profound sorrow. He broke off a tiny piece of his own ration of meat, a piece no larger than his thumbnail, and held it out to Ilara. "For the child," he whispered. "She burns fuel faster." Ilara nodded, accepting the truce. They huddled together, sharing the tiny flame, and began the wait. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only the sound of the wind, a constant, abrasive howl. Sona slept. Tavek dozed fitfully, his chants merging with the wind. Ilara and Kyle sat shoulder to shoulder, taking turns holding Sona, passing their shared warmth back and forth. In the dim light, Kyle's face looked carved from stone. "You saved the map," he murmured, so low only she could hear. I would have left it." "You were saving us," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I was saving the why. You were saving the how. We are the same, Kyle." He put his arm around her. "When the storm breaks, the tracks will be gone. The herds will be scattered. The steppe, it will be a blank stone. You will find them," she said. It was not a hope. It was a statement of fact. "You always do. This time is different," he said. "This is not our land. The animals are not the ones we know. The ice, it feels different. We will learn it," she said. "Or we will die." He nodded. "Or we will die." They fell into a silence that lasted hours, or perhaps days. The lamp's flame was their clock. When the oil ran low, they would melt a piece of the fat to refill it, rationing their lifeblood drop by drop. Then, the sound changed. The high-pitched, vibrating hum of the ice stopped. The oppressive, howling roar faded, replaced by a silence so profound it felt louder than the storm had been. Kyle was on his feet instantly. "It's over." He began kicking at the snow and ice he had packed into the entrance. Light, a blinding, painful blue-white, flooded their shelter. Ilara squinted, her eyes watering. The world had been remade. The sky was a pale, cloudless blue. The wind was gone, but the landscape was unrecognizable. Everything was buried under a new, pristine, impossibly deep layer of snow. There were no landmarks, no ridges, no sign of animal life. It was a sterile, beautiful, terrifying desert of white. "I must go," Kyle said, his voice flat. He was already checking the thong on his spear thrower, the atlatl that gave his arm the strength of 10 men. "The herds will be weak, looking for exposed grass." "Kyle," Ilara started to say. "No, I must go now, before anything else is moving. We are out of meat." He looked at Tavek. "Keep the lamp lit. If I am not back by the time the light changes, follow the sun. Go west, back the way we came." "Kyle, no," Tavek said, alarmed. "Do not speak of this. You will return." Kyle looked at Ilara, and his eyes held a tenderness that was so rare, it broke her heart. He touched Sona's cheek with the back of his gloved finger. "Your daughter is strong," he said. "She has your fire." Then he turned, climbed out of the hollow, and disappeared into the blinding white. The weight was the worst part of her life. Tavek tried to read the bones, scattering them on the hide, but his hands shook too badly. "The markings are unclear," he muttered. "The spirits are veiled." Ilara knew he was lying. The bones said nothing he wanted to hear. She sat at the entrance, her knife in her hand, and watched the empty horizon. She watched the sun, a pale disk, begin its slow arc toward the south. The light began to shift, the brilliant white turning to a colder, sharper blue. He was late. Her stomach tightened. Every shadow, every gust of snow kicked up by the light breeze looked like a returning hunter. But it never was. Tivavek had fallen into a shivering sleep. Sona was nursing, her small, warm body a comfort against Ilara's chest. The silence was absolute. And then she heard it. A crunch. No, a series of crunches. Heavy, measured. Not Kyle's lighter, quicker tread. Ilara's heart stopped. She gently pulled Sona from her breast, covering her mouth, her eyes fixed on the ridge 100 meters away. A figure appeared. It was not Kyle. It was massive. It walked on 4 legs, its shoulders rolling with a power that defied the cold. It was pale, almost white, its fur thick. It stopped, lifting its massive head, sniffing the air. A lion, but a lion larger than any bear. A lion with a sloping back and long, terrifying front limbs. The great lion of the steppe, Homotherium. They were supposed to be ghosts, creatures from the old stories. It turned its head, its gaze sweeping the landscape. It was looking, hunting. Ilara slid backward into the darkness of the shelter, her hand shaking. The beast was between them and Kyle, wherever Kyle was. The lion took a few steps, then paused. It lowered its head, sniffing the snow. It had found something, a track. It turned, its movements suddenly purposeful. It was moving fast, not toward Ilara. It was moving along the path Kale had taken. It was tracking him. "Tavek," she hissed, shaking him awake. "Tavek, wake up!" The old man startled. "What? Is he back?" Ilara grabbed her own spear, her knuckles white. She looked at the sleeping child, then at the tracks disappearing over the ridge. "No," she said, her voice hollow with a new kind of terror. "But something has found his trail." A cold, paralytic sickness flooded Ilara's stomach. There was no thought. There was only the image, the tracks. The size of them, splayed in the new snow, each one larger than her head, the casual, powerful, unhurried stride. This was not a scavenger. It was an apex hunter, the absolute master of this frozen world. And it was on Kale's trail. Behind her in the shelter, Sona sneezed, a tiny, frail sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. The choice was not a choice. It was a tearing. Imagine it. Your partner, the one whose strength you lean on, the father of your child, being stalked by a ghost. And your child, the small, warm, fragile life that is the future, left in the care of a broken old man. There was no good decision. There was only the fastest one. Ilara slid back into the ice cave, her movements sudden and violent. Tavek yelped, startled. "What? What spirits do you see?" She ignored him. She grabbed her own pack, checking its contents by instinct. The spare sinew, the flint scraper, the small bundle of dried herbs. She thrust her feet back into her snowpack boots, tying the hide thongs with a brutal efficiency. "Tavek," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice of the ice itself. He stared at her, uncomprehending. "What are you doing? You are not dressed for a hunt." "Keep Sona warm," Elara said. She unwrapped the child, whose eyes were wide and dark, and pressed her into Tavek's arms. The old man fumbled, his hands clumsy. "Warmth is life, Tavek. Put her against your skin. Do not let her cry. A sound will carry. Do you understand me? Do not let her cry." "Elara, no. You cannot leave us. The storm, the spirits." His voice cracked with fear. He was not a fighter. He was a keeper of memories, and his memories were all of fear. "A lion is on Kyle's trail." The words hit Tavek like a physical blow. All color drained from his face. Homotherium? No, they are myths. They do not hunt men. This one does, or it hunts the same prey, and Kyle is in its way. It does not matter." She grabbed her spear. It felt thin, a toothpick against the memory of those tracks. She grabbed her atlatl. "Stay inside. Do not light the lamp until you must. Block the entrance, but leave a small hole for air. If I am not back by the time the Skyfire returns, you are on your own. Take Sona and go back. Follow the coast. It is your only chance." "No!" he wailed, clutching Sona so tightly the child let out a small whimper. "You cannot ask this. I cannot protect her." Elara grabbed the front of his parka. She brought her face inches from his, her eyes burning with an intensity that terrified him more than the lion. You will keep her alive. Or your death will be the last of our line. There will be no one left to remember the ancestors, no one to chant the songs. Do you understand me, old man? Your memory dies if she dies." She did not wait for an answer. She turned and crawled out of the shelter, not looking back. To look back was to hesitate. To hesitate was to die. The world was blinding. The sun on the fresh snow created a landscape of pure, painful light. She pulled her fur hood low, her eyes scanning. The tracks were clear. The lion, for all its power, was heavy. It left a trail a blind man could follow. It was moving with purpose, heading toward a series of low, broken ridges to the northeast, the very direction Kale had gone, hoping to find the sheltered valleys where the muskox might be hiding from the storm. Elara began to move. She did not run. She fell into the gliding, ground-eating lope of the tundra hunter, a rhythm she could sustain for hours. Her spear was in her right hand, her atlatl in her left. She kept her head down, her gaze fixed on the tracks. She learned about her enemy as she walked. The beast was huge, larger than she had even imagined. The stride was long, meaning it was covering ground effortlessly. It was not running, it was patrolling. It owned this territory. It was not in a hurry. That was the worst part. It knew its prey was somewhere ahead, and it was confident. It was tracking Kale not as a threat, but as a meal. The cold bit at her, but she did not feel it. Her body was a machine, fueled by a singular cold fire. Every part of her screamed for Sona. The ache in her arms to hold her child was a physical pain, a counter-rhythm to the pounding of her feet. She suppressed it. Emotion was a luxury. It was a fire that burned fuel you did not have. For over an hour, she followed. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch swish of her own boots and the faint, distant whistle of the wind over the ice ridges. The tracks led her away from the open plain and into a different, more treacherous terrain. A vast, frozen riverbed, a place where the ancient water had carved a canyon through the permafrost. The tracks led down a steep, icy incline into the arroyo. Elara paused at the lip of the canyon. This was a trap, a terrain of ambush. The lion would know this. It was using the land. She had to assume Kale had entered this place as well, perhaps not realizing he was being followed. She could no longer follow the tracks directly. To descend into that gully was to put herself at the lion's mercy. She moved along the ridge of the canyon, parallel to the tracks, peering down into the blue-gray shadows. The arroyo snaked and twisted, creating blind corners. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest. Every shadow looked like a predator. Every gust of wind sounded like a roar. She stopped. What was that? A new scent on the air. It was faint, carried on the cross breeze. Copper, sharp and metallic. Blood. Her pace quickened. She moved from a lope to a desperate, scrambling run along the icy ridge. She rounded a sharp bend in the canyon and froze. She heard it before she saw it, a deep, coughing snarl that seemed to vibrate the ice under her feet. She dropped to her belly, crawling the last few feet to the edge, looking down. The scene below was a nightmare tableau. The arroyo widened here into a small, circular basin. Against the far wall of blue ice, Kyle was trapped. He was not the hunter. He was the prey. His spear was broken, the shaft shattered. His atlatl lay uselessly on the ice 20 feet away. In his left hand, he held his long flint knife. His right arm hung strangely at his side, his parka sleeve dark and wet with blood. He was breathing heavily, his exhalations forming huge plumes of white in the cold. 10 meters from him, circling, was the lion. It was impossible. It was a creature of myth. Its fur was the color of dirty snow, its shoulders a mass of rolling muscle higher than Kyle's head. Its face was broad and flat, and as it snarled, she saw the teeth, not the long, delicate fangs of the saber-tooth from the southern stories. These were shorter, thicker, serrated like her own scraping knife. They were teeth made for shearing flesh and breaking bone. The Homotherium, the scimitar cat. It was not toying with him. It was waiting. Kyle was leaning heavily on his left leg. The lion was watching him, its stubby tail twitching. It knew he was wounded. It knew he was trapped. It knew it had already won. Kyle saw her. His eyes flicked up to the ridge for just a second. It was not a look of hope. It was a look of command. Go. Run. Save Sonar. He didn't have to say the words. Ilara understood. He was trying to buy her time. He shifted his weight, raising his knife, and let out a roar of his own, a desperate, defiant challenge. The lion lunged. Not a full charge, but a feint, testing his defenses. Kyle swiped with the knife, forcing the beast to pull back. It sat on its haunches, regarding him with an intelligent, patient malice. Ilara's mind went clear. The fear vanished, replaced by a crystalline focus. She was above him, the high ground. The lion was focused entirely on Kale. Its broad, powerful back was to her. She had one chance. A spear throw from this distance was difficult. The wind was tricky, but she had the atlatl. It was the arm of a giant. She fitted the butt of her spear into the groove of the thrower. She felt the balance of it. She measured the distance, not the head. The hide was too thick, the skull too sloped. It would glance off. It had to be the soft place, behind the shoulder, the place where the ribs parted, where the lifeblood flowed. She rose slowly to one knee. The lion did not notice. Kyle did. He saw her movement and his eyes widened. He had to give her the shot. He had to make the lion turn. "Beast!" he roared, and he did the unthinkable. He threw his knife. It was a desperate, useless gesture. The knife spun end over end, clattering harmlessly against the ice at the lion's feet. But it was enough. The lion, insulted by the movement, rose and turned its body slightly, presenting its full broadside to Ilara as it prepared for a final, bone-crushing charge. "Now," Ilara whispered. She stood, drawing her arm back, her entire body coiling like a sinew-backed bow. All her strength, all her fear, all her love for Kale and Sona, focused into this one single point of action. She was the hunter. This was the moment. A howl. It was not a lion's snarl. It was high-pitched, mournful, and terrifyingly close. It did not come from the arroyo. It came from behind her, from the direction of the shelter. A second howl joined it, and a third. A pack. Ilara pivoted, her spear still held high. On the ridge across the plain, not 500 meters from where Tavek and Sona were hiding, a line of dark figures had appeared. They were not large. They were grey and lean and numerous. The dire wolves. They had smelled the blood from Kale's wound on the wind, or they had smelled the shelter. They knew. Ilara stood frozen on the ridge, the atlatl humming with stored power. Below her, the lion began its charge at Kyle. Behind her, the wolf pack began its loping run toward her child. She could throw the spear forward at the lion and watch the wolves overrun the shelter, or she could turn to face the pack and listen to the sound of Kale being torn apart in the gully. She had one spear, and she had 1 second. There was no time for a choice. There was only time for an action. The wolves were a problem. The lion was a finality. If Kale died, their journey died. He was the strength, the hunter, the one who read the ice. Without him, Ilara, Sona, and Tavik were just 3 slow deaths waiting for the cold to claim them. She could not save Sona tomorrow if Kale died now. The decision was made in the space between one frantic heartbeat and the next. Her body, trained by 1,000 hunts, pivoted back toward the gully. She did not aim at the lion. She aimed at the life of her family, which was currently trapped in the ice basin below. She aimed at Kale. She rose, a single fluid motion. The atlatl was an extension of her arm, a piece of bone and sinew that held the power of her lineage. The lion was charging, a low white and grey blur of muscle, its serrated teeth bared. Kyle, on his good leg, was trying to lurch sideways, to offer the beast his shoulder instead of his throat. Ilara screamed. It was not a word. It was a sound torn from the deepest part of her, a raw, primal shriek of rage and defiance. The sound startled the lion for a fraction of a second. It glanced up. It was all the time she needed. Her arm snapped forward. The atlatl whipped the spear, launching it with a force her arm alone could never achieve. The spear did not just fly. It drank the air, a dark line bisecting the white landscape. It struck the lion not in the head, but just behind the massive, sloping shoulder, exactly where she had willed it. The sound was a sickening, wet thump. The spear, tipped with razor-sharp obsidian, punched through the thick hide, through the muscle, and shattered the rib beneath. The Homotherium did not fall. It stopped. It seemed to hang in the air, its charge broken. A terrible, bubbling roar exploded from its lungs, a sound of profound shock and agony. It stumbled, twisting its body to look at the dark, vibrating shaft protruding from its side. It looked up at Ilara on the ridge, its yellow eyes burning with a sudden personal hatred. Kyle, seeing his chance, did not hesitate. He scrambled backward, crab-walking on his hands and his one good leg, putting distance between himself and the dying titan. The lion opened its mouth to roar again, and a spray of bright, arterial blood misted the ice. It was mortally wounded, but it was not dead, and all its rage was now focused on her. It lowered its head and began to climb. "Ilara!" Kyle screamed, his voice hoarse. "It's climbing!" Ilara was already moving. She had thrown her only weapon. She was defenseless. She scrambled back from the lip of the arroyo, her eyes searching wildly. The wolves. They had stopped their run toward the shelter. The alpha, a huge grey male with a scarred muzzle, stood on the ridge, its head high, sniffing the wind. It had heard the lion's death roar. It smelled the ocean of blood that was now pooling in the gully. It threw its head back and howled, a long summoning call. The pack answered. They changed direction. They were no longer interested in the faint, uncertain scent from the ice cave. They were headed for the certainty of the dying predator and the feast it represented. They poured over the ridge and disappeared into the arroyo, a grey tide of hunger. Ilara did not pause to watch. "Kyle, climb! Use the ice wall!" she yelled, her voice frantic. She ran along the ridge to a place where the slope was less steep, a tumble of old ice blocks forming a jagged staircase into the gully. She half fell, half slid down the incline, landing heavily on the arroyo floor. The sound was horrific, a chorus of snarls, snaps, and the tearing of flesh. The wolf pack had swarmed the Homotherium. The great cat, in its dying throes, was still fighting, swiping with its massive hooked claws, but the sheer number of wolves was overwhelming it. They were a single writhing entity of teeth and fur, tearing at the cat's belly and throat. Kyle was 20 meters away, dragging himself along the ice. His right arm was completely useless, the parka sleeve shredded from shoulder to elbow. His left leg was buckling. "I can't," he panted, his face the color of old snow. "My leg, it's going numb." Ilara reached him. She grabbed his abandoned atlatl and his bloody flint knife from the ice. She slung the thrower over her own back and put the knife in his left hand. "Hold this," she commanded. She hauled him to his feet. He screamed as his weight settled on the injured leg. She ignored it. "Move, lean on me, now, Kale." She became his crutch. His good arm went over her shoulder, and she took his weight. They began the agonizingly slow journey out of the basin. The sound of the feeding frenzy was just yards away, a grotesque, wet symphony of destruction. A wolf, its muzzle crimson, broke from the pack and saw them. It growled low in its chest. Ilara bared her teeth and hissed, raising the bloody knife Kyle had given her. The wolf hesitated. The carcass was rich. They were not. It turned and dove back into the fray. They stumbled, fell, and rose again. Every step was a lifetime. Kyle was a dead weight, his consciousness fading. "Sona," he mumbled, his feet dragging. "Ilara, Sona. Sona is alive because you are alive." Ilara hissed, pulling him forward. "Do not die on me. I cannot carry you and fight. Do you hear me? Stay awake." His name was a prayer, a threat, a plea. They reached the broken slope and began to climb. It was a nightmare. Ilara was driving her own feet into the ice, using her free hand to find purchase, all while bearing Kyle's weight. He was trying, pushing with his good leg, but his strength was gone. Finally, gasping, they crested the ridge. The shelter was in sight, a dark slash in the white plain. It was blessedly, beautifully silent. "We're almost there," she breathed, her lungs burning. "Kyle, stay with me." They half walked, half fell the last 100 meters. Ilara kicked at the snow block Tavek had placed at the entrance. "Tavek, it's us." The block slid away. The old man's face was a mask of terror. "The wolves," he whispered. "I heard them. They were everywhere." "They found other food," Ilara said, shoving Kyle inside. Kyle collapsed onto the furs, groaning, finally letting unconsciousness take him. Sona, startled by the commotion, began to cry. Tavek, still clutching the child, stared at Ilara. She was splattered with Kyle's blood, her face streaked with sweat and frozen tears. You went after him," he said, his voice full of a new, strange awe. "Keep the child quiet," Ilara snapped. The crisis was not over. It had just changed shape. She knelt by Kyle, and her hands, which had been so steady with the spear, began to shake violently. Now that the adrenaline was gone, the terror was rushing in, cold and dark. She fought it back. She grabbed her knife. "Tavek, the lamp, light it. I need to see the wound." The small, oily flame sputtered to life, illuminating the cramped shelter. Ilara cut Kyle's parka sleeve away. The wound was horrific. The lion's claws had ripped through the fur, through the hide, and into the muscle of his shoulder and upper arm. It was a series of 4 parallel gashes, deep and ragged, already swelling. But it was the other injury that was worse. When he had fallen, his right leg had twisted under him. His ankle was swollen to the size of a skin bladder, the bone clearly displaced. He was broken. Their hunter, their protector, their how was broken. Ilara looked at the wound, then at her pack. She pulled out her small bundle of dried moss, the kind that drew out infection, and the tough sinew she used for sewing hides. "Tavek, hold him," she said. Tavek, clumsy, put Sona into her cradleboard and leaned on Kyle's good shoulder. Ilara threaded the bone needle. Kyle's skin was cold. She pushed the needle through his flesh to stitch the worst of the gashes closed. He didn't even flinch. He was too deep in shock. She worked for an hour, her movements economical, her face grim. She packed the wound with the moss, then bound it with tight strips of scraped hide. She took his leg and, with a brutal, efficient yank, reset the ankle. Kyle's body arched in a silent scream, but he did not wake. She immobilized the joint with 2 flat pieces of driftwood she carried for splints. When she was done, she sat back, her entire body aching. The shelter was silent, save for Kyle's shallow, fevered breathing. Tavek rocked Sona, who had fallen back asleep. The ancestors saved him, Tavek whispered. Ilara shook her head. She looked at Kyle, shivering with fever. She looked at Tavek, old and frail. She looked at Sona, small and vulnerable. The ancestors did nothing. The wolves are feasting. For now. She looked at their supplies, illuminated by the lamp. The 3 strips of dried meat were gone. The bladder of fat was almost empty. They had warmth, they had shelter, but they had no food and no hunter. He has a fever, she said, her voice flat. The lion's claws, they were not clean. Tavek's face fell, the brief hope extinguished. The spirits will not feed us. Ilara cut him off. We rest. We wait for the fever to break, and we wait for the meat to run out. The wait was a new kind of terror. The hours, perhaps a day, stretched on. The silence of their cave was a tomb, broken only by Kale's fevered muttering and the faint cries of Sona. Ilara's milk was thin, her own body starved. The wolves did not return. The steppe was silent. The threat was no longer outside. It was inside, in the heat rising from Kyle's wound and the emptiness in their stomachs. On what might have been the second day, Kyle's fever broke. Ilara woke from a fitful, freezing doze to find him staring at her. His eyes were clear. The fire was gone, but so was the strength. He was hollowed out, a husk. Ilara, he rasped. She gave him melted ice. He drank. He looked at his bound arm, at his splintered leg. He understood. The food, he whispered. Gone, she said. He closed his eyes. The weight of his failure was a physical thing in the small space. He was the Ata, the provider, and he was now a mouth, a burden. You must, Kyle began, his voice firming with a terrible last resolve. You must take Tavek and Sona. You must leave me, use the night. Go back to the coast. I am the anchor. No, the word was small, but absolute. Ilara, he pleaded, grabbing her arm with his good hand. His grip was weak. It is the only way. The hunt law, the strong must not die for the weak. You know this. You are not weak, she said, her voice breaking. You are Kyle. I will not. Then we all die here, he whispered. A new despair, colder than the ice, settled on Ilara. He was right. Tavek was right. They were going to die. Not in a great battle, but in a small, dark hole. A rage, different from any she had ever known, filled her. It was a rage against the stillness. She would not wait for death. She would meet it. She scrambled to the entrance, her fingers raw. She would go out, she would take the fishing spear, and she would fight. She would not wait. She pushed the block aside an inch. The grey light of the long dusk flooded in. She saw the steppe, empty, silent, and indifferent. The wolves were gone, moved on. There was nothing, no life, no threat, only the vast, cold emptiness, and the knowledge that they were starving. Ilara stared, her hatred a physical force. She would not. A sound, a low, vibrating groan. It was not the wind, it was not a wolf. It came from under her. The ice beneath her hand moved. Tavek let out a thin, terrified wail. The ground. Ilara. The ground. Crack. The sound was not like thunder. It was the sound of the world tearing in half. A dark, jagged line, a spiderweb of fracture, shot up the crystalline wall of their shelter. The ice was shifting. Their shelter, the pressure ridge that had saved them, was not a rock. It was a vice. And the vice was closing. The entire shelter lurched, throwing them against the wall. Sona shrieked. The snow block at the entrance cracked and fell away. The world did not just shake, it tore. The groan was not a sound. It was a vibration that came from the core of the planet, traveling up through the ice and into their bones. The ice cave, their prison and their shelter, became a closing fist. The wall opposite the entrance didn't just crack, it shattered. A web of black fractures appearing instantly, and then the entire crystalline structure shifted. Chunks of ancient blue ice, each weighing as much as a man, rained down from the ceiling. One struck the place where Tavek had been sitting, exploding into 1,000 sharp fragments. He shrieked. a sound of pure animal terror, and scrambled backward, shielding Sona with his body. There was no thought. There was only Ilara's body moving, a machine programmed for one thing: Sona. She grabbed the cradle board from Tavek's paralyzed arms. She thrust it back at him, her face a mask of terrible, cold command. "Out!" she screamed over the grinding roar of the ice. "Out! Not the entrance, the crack!" She pointed to the new, widening fissure in the back wall of the cave. It was a dark, jagged wound, leading through the ridge, not out of it. "I cannot!" Tavek wailed, his eyes wide. "It is darkness! The entrance is collapsing. The crack is a chance. Move, old man, or I will kill you myself." Her voice cut through his panic. It was a threat so insane, so violent it shocked him into motion. He clutched the cradle board to his chest. Sona's terrified screams muffled against his parka, and scrambled into the dark, grinding fissure. He was gone. "Now, Kyle." Ilara turned. He was a dead weight, his eyes half open. "Kyle, help me!" she grunted, her muscles screaming. "Help me, or you die here!" He groaned, a faint sound. "Ice. Breaking. Yes, it's breaking. On your feet. Your good leg." She hauled him up. He put his one good foot under him, his face contorting in agony as his broken ankle dragged. He was barely conscious, but the primal fear of the collapsing earth gave him a last, flickering spark of strength. He leaned on her, a collapsing structure of a man. She was his only pillar. Together, a grotesque, three-legged creature, they staggered toward the fissure. The entire ridge was splitting, a canyon opening where their cave had been. Ilara and Kyle plunged into the dark crack. It was not a tunnel. It was a gauntlet. The walls were so close they scraped her shoulders, and they were moving, grinding against each other. The sound was deafening. She shoved Kyle forward. He fell, crawled, dragged himself. Ilara was right behind him, pushing him. They were not walking. They were being birthed from the collapsing ice. They burst out of the other side of the ridge, tumbling, falling onto an entirely new landscape. The world had been remade. The flat, white steppe was gone. The land bridge, the very ground they had been walking on, had calved. They were on a vast, sloping sheet of ice. Below them, not 1,000 meters, was a blackness that steamed. The sea, the frozen sea. The crack they had escaped was now a 20-meter-wide chasm. And on the other side, the mainland they had just left, the wolf pack paced, drawn by the sound. The alpha stood at the edge, staring at them, its breath pluming. It was a look of pure, frustrated hatred. They had escaped, but they had escaped onto something worse. "Tavek!" Ilara screamed, her voice hoarse, scanning the new, tilted plain of ice. "Here!" His voice was thin. He was 50 meters away, to her left. He was on his knees, Sona still strapped to him. He had made it. They were alive. Boom! The sound was deeper than the cracking. It was a low, resonant groan that came from the sea itself. The vast sheet of ice they were on, a piece of land perhaps a kilometer square, shuddered, and it moved. It was not a slide. It was a drift. They were no longer on a land bridge. They were on an ice floe. A monster set adrift. "No," Ilara breathed, the implication hitting her. She ran, stumbling on the uneven, fractured ice to Kale. He had collapsed, his head lolling. "Kale!" She shook him. "Kale, wake up! We are on the water!" The shock of the cold, or her voice, penetrated his haze. He opened his eyes. He looked, not at her, but at the sky. He sniffed the air. "Salt," he rasped. "I smell salt." He pushed himself up on his one good arm, his eyes, the eyes of the hunter, scanning the impossible new reality. He saw the black, steaming water. He saw the wolves, now just distant figures, on the land they could never regain. He looked at Tavek and Sona on the same vast plate of ice. "The ice is breaking up," he said. His voice was no longer delirious. It was the voice of a man pronouncing a death sentence. The fever was gone, replaced by a cold, terrible clarity. The storm, the tectonic shift, it had fractured the very edge of the continent. Tavek, seeing them, started to move toward them, picking his way across the cracked ice. "Stay there!" Kyle roared, his voice suddenly powerful. Tavek froze. "The cracks! Do not cross the cracks! This is not land! This is a raft, and it is breaking!" As if to prove his words, the floe groaned again. Elara looked at her partner. His body was broken. His skin was grey, but his mind was back. "What do we do?" she asked. It was the first time in her life she had asked that question with no answer of her own. Kyle surveyed their new prison. "We need to move," he panted. "The center, the highest point. It will be the most stable." "You cannot walk," she said, the words flat. "I do not need to walk," he said. He looked at her, his eyes full of a grim, familiar determination. "I have you." Elara nodded. She went to Tavek. "Give me your spear," she commanded. Tavek, his face numb, handed her his walking spear. "Go to the high point." Elara pointed to a hump of blue ice near the center of the floe. "Find shelter. Scrape snow. Keep Sona warm." Tavek, grateful for a command, nodded and began his slow, careful journey. Elara returned to Kyle. She looped a length of hide rope from her pack under his arms, around his chest. She tied the other end around her own waist. She was the beast. He was the sled. She leaned forward, taking the strain. He groaned, his broken leg dragging, but she did not stop. She began the agonizing step-by-step process of dragging her partner toward the center of their floating, dissolving island. The wolves were gone. The lion was gone. The shelter was gone. Now, there was only the ice, and the dark, patient, impossibly cold water that waited beneath it. She was halfway to the high point when Kyle, his voice a dry rasp, said her name. "Elara." She stopped, her lungs heaving. "What?" He was not looking at her. He was looking past her toward the open sea. His hunter's eyes were narrowed. "Look," he whispered, a new, strange emotion in his voice. It was not fear. It was awe. Elara turned, squinting against the grey light. The sea was not empty. In the distance, rising from the black water, was a wall. It was not a wall of ice. It was a wall of dark, wet rock, streaked with white. It was land. The other side, the new world. It was real. But between them and that dark promise was an endless, moving, churning field of broken ice. And their flow was not drifting toward it. It was drifting past it, carried by a powerful, indifferent current, parallel to the coast, out, toward the vast, empty, open ocean. The land was not a promise. It was a torment. It was a dark, jagged line of reality that proved Kale's myth was true, but it offered itself only as a sight, not as a salvation. The current pulled them further south, further past it. The land was not approaching. It was receding. "We are moving fast." Kale's voice was a dry croak beside her. Elara did not stop pulling. She leaned into the hide rope, her muscles screaming. The new wind was a wet, heavy, suffocating blanket. It soaked through their furs, stealing heat with a greedy, liquid touch. "The high point, Elara. We must be above the water." She reached Tavek. The old man was on his knees, his back to the new world, his eyes closed. He was rocking Sona, humming. It was the sound of a man who had outlived his own mind. "Tavek!" Elara roared. "The wall! We must build a wall!" He did not look at her. "The void," he whispered. "The world has no floor. Then we will be our own ancestors." She shrieked, grabbing his shoulder. "We will be the ones who begin. Sona will not die here. Now build." She shoved him toward a pile of smaller, fractured ice chunks. The command, the violence of it, broke his paralysis. He began to move, his hands clumsy, picking up pieces of ice, stacking them. Elara unhooked herself from Kyle. He collapsed onto the ice. "The shelter must face away from the sea," he panted, his teeth chattering. "The spray, it will kill us first." He was right. Elara and Tavek, a broken old man and an exhausted woman, began to build. They did not have the strength to build a shelter. They built a low crescent-shaped wall of ice, barely a meter high. It was a windbreak. It was a tombstone. It was all they had. Behind this wall, they huddled, the four of them. Elara laid Kyle out, his head on her pack. Tavek cradled Sona, rocking, humming, and Ilara, the center, sat and watched the world dissolve. The grinding was the worst part. It was constant. The sound of their flow, their island, scraping against smaller pieces of ice. Scree, crunch, groan. It was the sound of their world dying, piece by piece. Time, again, lost its meaning. There was no sun, only a grey, luminous lid on the world. The only clock was Sona's hunger. The child woke, and her cry began. It was not the angry, healthy wail from the ice cave. This was a thin, weak, bird-like sound that pierced Ilara's soul. "Shh, shh, little bird," she murmured, pulling her from Tvek. She put Sona to her breast. The child latched on, her small mouth pulling, desperate. And there was nothing. Ilara's milk was gone. Her body, starved, beaten, frozen, had made its choice. It was saving itself. Sona pulled away, her face contorting, and she screamed. A real scream, a sound of betrayal and terror and raw, aching, empty-bellied hunger. That sound did what the lion, the wolves, and the breaking ice could not. It broke Kale's control. "Give her to me," he commanded, his voice suddenly hard. Frightened, she passed Sona to him. He cradled her with his one good arm, pressing her against his chest under his parka. "Your mother is weak," he rasped, his voice a low rumble. "But I am Ata. I am the hunter, and I am here." He began to sing, a low, hunting chant, a song about the first mammoth. He sang his own strength into his daughter. Sona's cries softened, quieting, mesmerized by the vibration of his voice. She was not fed, but she was held. Ilara watched, her body shaking. She had failed, and he, broken and dying, had found a way. But it was not enough. "We must eat," she said, her voice hollow. "Yes," Kyle said. He had not stopped watching. His eyes, fever bright, were fixed on the water. "Look," he pointed with his chin. "The birds." Ilara looked. Gulls, grey and white, were circling a spot 50 meters from their flow. "Life follows life," Kyle whispered. "The sea, it provides." Ilara's eyes followed his, and she saw them. Dark, glistening shapes, resting on a smaller, flatter piece of ice that was floating perhaps 100 meters away. Seals, 4 of them, sleek, fat, and asleep. They were a larder, a feast, but they were on another island separated by a channel of black, churning water. "We cannot reach them," she said, the despair rushing back. "No," Kyle said. "You will. Your fishing spear, the rope, bring them." Ilara scrambled. She brought the short, light spear and the coiled length of cured hide. "Give me the spear." He took it, and with his good hand and his teeth he began to unfasten the small barbed bone tip. "Useless," he muttered. "The knife. Your knife, Ilara." She gave it to him. He put the handle in his mouth and with his good arm began to hammer the butt of the knife with a piece of ice, driving the flint blade into the haft of the fishing spear, splitting the wood. He jammed the blade in, then took the sinew from the old tip and began to bind the knife blade to the spear. He was making a new weapon, a hybrid, not a spear, a harpoon. "It will not hold," she said. "It will hold." For one moment, he panted, the effort costing him everything. The rope, tie it. A slip knot, near the head. He was a master even now. He was creating a detachable toggle. If she struck, the blade head tied to the rope would detach from the shaft and turn sideways under the seal's skin. It was a weapon of breathtaking, desperate genius. He finished. He held it up. It was a pathetic, ugly thing, but it was possible. "The large one," he said, nodding toward the seals. "It is sleeping on the edge. You must cross." Ilara looked. The water between them and the seals was not open, but it was not solid. It was a field of pancake ice, smaller circular flows that bobbed and tilted. A stepping stone path, a path to death. "Kyle, I cannot swim." "You will not swim," he said, his eyes burning into hers. "You are the Ice Walker. You are my Ilara. You will not fall. You will crawl. You will be a shadow. You will be snow. You will move now, before they wake." He looked at Sona, asleep on his chest. "Hunt for your daughter." That was all. She took the harpoon. She took the coiled rope, tying the end around her own waist. She looked at the new world, now just a smudge of grey on the horizon. The open ocean waited. This was the last chance. She crawled to the edge of their flow. The black water lapped at the ice, inches from her face. She placed her hands on the first, bobbing pancake of ice. It held her weight. She pulled herself forward, out of Kale's sight, out of Tavek's sight. She was alone. On the water, she was a hunter. She moved, a low white shadow from one piece of ice to the next, her body flat, her breath held. The world shrank to the sound of the grinding ice and the feel of the rope, her lifeline, sliding silently behind her. 20 meters, 10. She was on the same flow as the seals. They were huge, mountains of blubber, life. She could smell them. She could hear the soft, huffing breath of the large male. She was 5 meters away. She rose slowly, so slowly, to one knee. She raised the harpoon. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold it, not from cold, from hunger. She steadied herself. One throw, for Sona, for Kyle. Crunch. It was not her. The entire floe she was on, the one with the seals, slammed into another larger piece of ice. The collision was violent. The floe bucked. The seals, startled, woke instantly. They did not look. They moved. In one fluid, blubbery motion, they barked in alarm and dove, one after another, into the black water. "No!" Elara screamed, her voice a silent, agonized wail. She rose to her feet, defeated. The last seal, the big male, was at the edge, about to dive. As it did, the water exploded. It was not a seal, a vast black and white shape, as long as 3 men breached the surface. Its mouth was open, filled with teeth larger than her hand. It was the color of the ice and the void. It seized the half-ton seal in its jaws as if it were a fish, a fin. A dorsal blade as tall as Elara herself sliced through the water. The orca, the wolf of the sea. It had been hunting the seals, using the ice as a barrier, and she, Elara, had been in the middle of its hunting ground. The water turned red. The killer whale thrashed, its power absolute, and then it was gone, leaving only a cloud of blood and the echo of its terrible, silent power. The red, churning water where the seal had been was an ending. The blood, a final, definitive stain on the grey, indifferent ice, was the sea's answer. Elara did not move. She knelt on the bobbing, fractured ice, the useless, clever harpoon still in her hand. She had failed. She was the hunter, and she had failed. The wind, which had pushed them, died, leaving an absolute, waiting silence. She crawled back across the stepping stones of ice, the rope a heavy, useless thing dragging in the water. She collapsed onto their main floe, the one that held her entire world. Kyle was watching her. He had seen it all, the hunt, the whale, the failure. She expected to see his despair, but his eyes, fever bright in his grey, sunken face, were clear. He was not looking at the bloody water. He was looking past her, at the horizon. His cracked lips moved. Tavek, the old man who was rocking Sona, humming a tuneless, empty sound, did not respond. "Tavek," Kale said, louder, his voice a harsh rasp. "Give me the child." Tavek, startled, obeyed. Kale took his daughter with his one good arm. He settled her on his chest inside his parka. He looked at Elara, who was still on her knees, a statue of defeat. "It is not the end, Elara," he whispered. She shook her head, the motion numb. "It is." "No." He winced, shifting his broken leg. "The storm, it gave us to the sea, but the sea is turning." He sniffed the air, a movement of pure animal instinct. "The wind is changing the land. It is not finished with us." And she felt it. A new movement, not the steady southern drift. The flow shuddered, then stilled. The grinding of the smaller ice packs lessened. The great invisible river of the current was pausing, as if taking a breath. And then, a new cold wind, this one from the northwest, began to push. It was a gentle breath, then a shove. The black fortress of the new world, the land that had been receding, stopped receding. It hung on the horizon, and then slowly, agonizingly, it began to grow. The wind, their first enemy, had become their last, desperate ally. It was pushing them back. It was pushing them toward the shore. "We are not landing," Kyle breathed, his hunter's mind alive, calculating. "We are grounding." The land did not welcome them. It prepared to shatter them. The new coast was not a beach. It was a wall of black, jagged stone, a line of fangs waiting for them. The wind pushed their flow, their island, faster and faster, until it was a weapon aimed at the rocks. Tavek began to wail, the sound of pure, final terror. "Silence, old man," Kyle roared. "Ilara, your knife, the rope, cut the furs. We will need handholds." Ilara's paralysis broke. She moved. She sliced strips of hide, wrapping them around her hands, around Kyle's good hand. The impact was not a single event. It was a symphony of destruction. The flow struck the first, submerged rocks. A sound like thunder, a groan that was the ice's death, shuddered through them. The entire world tilted, sending Tavek sliding. He screamed, his hands clawing at the ice. "Sona!" Ilara screamed. Kyle had the child. He was holding her, shielding her. "Ilara, the rock! The rock!" A pinnacle of black, wet stone, slick with algae, was now meters away. Their flow, breaking apart, was a rising, falling, tilting platform. "You must jump!" Kyle panted, shoving Sona into Ilara's arms. "Take her! Jump! Now!" Ilara looked. The gap was black, churning water, filled with ice shards. It was too far. "I can't." "You will!" He grabbed the back of her parka. "The wave! Wait for the wave!" The sea pulled back and their flow dropped. Then a new massive swell rose, lifting them high. "Now, Ilara, jump!" The wave pushed them level with the black rock. Ilara, clutching her child, did not jump. She dove. She landed on her shoulder on solid, immovable, agonizing stone. She felt a crack in her ribs, but it was land. It did not move. She turned, gasping, Sona wailing. Kyle was still on the flow. It was already pulling back with the water. The gap was widening. He was on his knees. He was too broken. He could not make the jump. Their eyes met. The man who had crossed a continent of ice was 5 meters from safety, and it was 1,000 kilometers. "Kyle!" she shrieked. He did not try to jump. He was the Ata. He was the provider. He knew the lore of the hunt. He had brought her to the new land. His journey was over. He looked at her, and at the wailing child in her arms. He did not look sad. He did not look afraid. He looked finished. He looked proud. He raised his one good hand, his fingers spreading. Not a wave, a final sign. "You are strong. You are the hunter now." Then he turned his back to her and faced the sea. A new wave came. When it passed, the ice and the man were gone. Ilara lay on the rock for a long time, the cold rain of this new world mixing with the tears she had not known she still possessed. The sea thundered below her, angry and gray. Sona's cries brought her back. She was not just Ilara. She was a mother. She was the last of her line. She was the first of the new one. She pushed herself up, her ribs screaming. The rock was slick, the climb impossible. She put Sona inside her parka, against the warmth of her skin, against the heart that Kale had saved. She found the first handhold, and turning her back on the sea forever, she began to climb. It took an age. Her body was a map of pain, but she did not stop. She climbed until her fingers were raw, until the thundering of the sea was a roar far below. Finally, she hauled herself over the lip of the cliff and collapsed onto soil. It was not snow. It was wet, cold mud, but it was mud. She stood, shaking, and looked out. This new world was not a paradise. It was gray and wet and shrouded in mist. But Kyle, he had been right. In the distance, down in a sheltered valley, she saw it. A dark, jagged line of green-blue, a color she had only known from memory. Trees. The ice had surrendered. It was not a paradise. It was not a home, but it was a place to begin. Ilara adjusted the weight of her daughter, turned her face toward the distant color, and took the first step.